Hey guys, it's good to be here. You guys been here all day? It's probably been a long day, right? Well, I'll try not to put you to sleep, I promise. By the way, I'm very proud of myself. I'm wearing a suit and a tie, and something that I haven't really done much since I left the Capitol. Actually almost showed up here wearing a robe and slippers, like the dude from Big Lebowski or something. But my mom, who is watching the stream at home, Mom, I'm okay. I look okay. So I want to thank you all for being here, and I'm about to tell you my story, which a drug addiction is not a Disney movie. There's some serious stuff that you're going to hear, but the fact that I'm standing up here and telling it tells you that there's a happy ending, and that happy endings are possible. It was the summer of 2002 when I had a gun pointed at my head for the first time. I was about 25 years old, and I was unemployed, and I was recently fired from a job as a morning show anchor for a TV network in Colorado. Fired because I was doing a lot of drugs. So me and my boyfriend at the time, who's an alcoholic, we were quite the pair. We were like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, not really. We're spending a lot of our free time together getting drunk and high every day, and evading phone calls from my very intimidating drug dealer. This guy was no nonsense. He was tough and tattooed, and he owned guns. I was a good customer, so we developed a relationship where he would front me large quantities of cocaine. And the idea was that I would sell the drugs, use that money to pay him back, and I would keep some of the profit. That was the idea, in theory. But when you're doing cocaine every day, you're not a very good money manager. I wasn't exactly Charles Schwab. I was the worst cocaine dealer in the history of Boulder, actually, because all of my profits just went up my nose. So I owed him hundreds and hundreds of dollars. I was avoiding his phone call, but I was this out-of-work television anchor with a no-good boyfriend and no money to pay him back. So he's leaving me threatening phone calls, threatening bodily harm, threatening to kill me unless I pay him back his money. So my boyfriend cons his uncle into loaning us a bunch of money, and I call my drug dealer to let him know I had his money and I'm coming over to pay him. And when I got there, he was calm, which put me at ease. That was until he shut the door behind me, and the next thing I felt was his fist against the back of my head. I fell to the ground, and I looked up at the barrel of a gun. I begged for my life. I showed him a fistful of dollars, but he just stood there with no emotion, holding that gun over me. Then he started kicking me in the head, kicking my ribs, kicking all over my body, and the whole time that I'm thinking, how did things ever get this far? That's a question I often ask myself through years and years of addiction. How did things ever get this far? How am I bankrupt? Where did my friends go? Why am I in bad health? Why can't I stop doing drugs? The Colorado Health Institute asked me to share my story today, and I'm not here to talk about policy initiatives. That's for other folks. I'm here to put a human face on a problem that's getting worse. Last year, more Coloradans died from drug overdoses than any other year in the state's history. But now we all know people are dying, but it's also important to show that people are surviving, that recovery is possible, and I'm going to talk about that today. It's impossible to talk about my life in 45 minutes, so I'm only going to hit the highlights, or in some cases, the lowlights. But I'm going to start from the beginning, because as I learned in recovery, my problems started long before I ever started using drugs. I grew up in Longmont, Colorado, as Joe mentioned, and I have a loving family, a large Latino household, parents who love me unconditionally. But my parents, we had problems. My parents struggled financially. We were a lower middle class family at best, and there were times where we were just flat out poor. And I would look around and go to my friends' places and notice that they lived in fancier, bigger houses than we did. And my dad, who I love and adore, was a family man. He served our country in the Army, but he was also an alcoholic. And like many people who become addicts, I grew up in a household where substance abuse was prevalent. My dad would give you the shirt off of his back, but when he drank, he was often miserable to be around. And on top of that, I'm gay. And I knew that I was gay at a very young age, and today it's so widely embraced, but this was small-town Colorado in the 1980s and 90s. It's not the same. It's not what it used to be. And being gay wasn't exactly widely embraced at that time. So here I am, poor family, alcoholic father, struggling with the fact that I'm gay and different than the other kids. And so already as a teenager, I'm dealing with insecurities that would plague me for a really long time. And I dealt with those insecurities in really unhealthy ways. I was a problem child in school. I was the class clown at best. I tried to make everyone laugh. But at worst, I mouthed off to teachers all the time. If it was a day that ended with the letter Y, Vic was getting kicked out of class. That's just the way it was. But in early high school, I found something that took the edge off my pain. I fell in love with drugs and alcohol. When I smoked weed and drank, it made me feel like I was floating on a cloud. It made all of my problems and insecurities seem manageable. I'm only a young teenager, but I'm already learning something that would be the case through all of my adult life, that I could self-medicate my feelings away. I fell in love with pot, with tequila, and LSD and mushrooms. And I remember taking LSD for the first time. I was laying in my friend's bed listening to the Grateful Dead and watching the patterns on the ceiling dance to the songs. Why wouldn't I want to feel like this every day? It's beautiful. Why wouldn't I want to get high every day? But drugs only did so much to mask my pain. High school was torture for me, dealing with being gay, in the closet, not being able to tell anyone about those feelings. And I was in love with my best friend, which made those feelings so much worse to deal with. I couldn't tell anyone. I was all alone. So I was sort of a walking time bomb, a walking ticking time bomb. And my high school career went out with a bang when I got into this big argument with a teacher who was dragging me, literally kicking and screaming, to the principal's office one day about a month before graduation. And when I got there, I'm throwing chairs, I'm kicking things, I'm cursing. School officials threatened to call the cops. I finally settled down, and when I did, I just collapsed my face into the palms of my hands and wept until my mom came to get me. I was suspended the final month of my senior year, and I was barely allowed to graduate high school. So as you can see, I'm a young guy, I'm only a teenager, and I'm dealing with some really heavy things. And this was before drugs became a problem. Life wasn't all that bad, though. When I got out of high school, I was accepted to Metropolitan State University of Denver. I moved to Denver. I lived in the big city, lived on Capitol Hill, and I came out of the closet. And now I'm 18 years old, and I'm in college in a big city, and my friends and family know and love me for exactly who I am. I still did drugs, and I drank in college, of course. I had a fake ID, and I went to bars and everything. But for the most part, I was well behaved in college. And I think every drug addict remembers a time in their life when drugs were actually fun, when they didn't cause problems. And for me, that was college. I got good grades, and I studied broadcasting. I interned at Denver television stations, and I became the first member of my immediate family to graduate college. It was a really big deal, and my parents were really proud of me. Then just a month or so after graduating, I got my first job in journalism as a sports anchor for an NBC affiliate in Texas. This was the year 2000. And here I am, I'm only 23 years old, and my face is on billboards. I have a full head of hair at that time, right? That's the one thing I miss. I don't miss the drugs. I miss the hair a little. But I look okay, though. I look good. I mean, my face is on billboards. It's quite an ego thing for a kid, right? And I'm on live television covering Friday Night Lights in Texas. I'm interviewing people like Jerry Jones and Bobby Knight, big names in sports. And I just knew that I was on my way to being a sports center anchor. I just knew it. The sky's the limit. But a funny thing happened on the way to my dreams. I fell in love with the drug that would become my master, and that's cocaine. I first did cocaine in college, but it wasn't until I was living in Texas that I became consumed by the drug. Like any addiction, it started off as an innocent flirtation, maybe doing some blow at a party on a Saturday night or something, but then I started using it every day, and I started using it throughout the day. Cocaine made me feel like $1 million. As soon as that powder zipped through my nose, I was off to the races. It was beautiful. I don't know why anyone wouldn't want to feel like that. Often before I would go on the air, I would go have some drinks at a bar, come back to the station, go to the makeup room, put on my makeup, adjust my tie, and do lines of cocaine off the toilet seat. And then I would go on the air and do a live sportscast like nothing happened. I did it all the time. And as my cocaine intake increased, so did other risky behaviors. Anonymous sexual encounters, occasional intravenous drug use, intravenous cocaine use, shooting up cocaine. No one knew because I would just smile and tell jokes and go on the air and do great work. But things took a bad turn when I was laid off from my job. It actually didn't have anything to do with me or my drug use. The station made changes to many positions all at the same time. So they said they were sorry, they let some people go, and they gave us all a check, and I moved back to Denver. And this was the summer of 2001. And after a few months of getting drunk and high every day, I landed back on my feet, and I was hired again, this time as a morning host for a national network that is now called Outside Television. I was living in Summit County. I had this loft. I was telling funny jokes on the air every morning. I had a co-host. I was interviewing celebrities and bands who were coming through the mountains. I was living in one of the most beautiful places on earth, Summit County. But while I was living in a place that was surrounded by snow that's perfect for skiing, that wasn't the kind of white powder I was interested in. My loft had this amazing view of Dillon Valley, but most days I would just close the blinds and do cocaine all day and all night. Summit County was where my drug use first started to interfere with my work and my personality. You had to get up really early for a morning show, and most days I was doing that without getting any sleep. I would party all night and take a quick shower and go to the station high and haggard. And during commercial breaks, I would go into the bathroom to do cocaine and come back on the set and interview my guests. I was doing cocaine in the newsroom at 7 o'clock in the morning. I was living an insane life. And then I would go home after the morning show and crash all day, even though I still had work to do. My station manager and producers would call, wondering where I was, but I would just shut off my phone and sleep all day long. And when the drugs ran out, which they always do at some point, I would grow irritable. I was short with people. I would snap at producers. I was a prima donna who was either high and happy or sleep deprived and miserable. There were no in-betweens. I was just living in extremes. Until one day my boss had enough and fired me. So just like that, I lost my second TV job in as many years. So that brings us back to my story about the drug dealer, you know, the one who had a gun pointed at my head. I'm unemployed and I owe a dangerous drug dealer hundreds of dollars. He's kicking my ass, and when he's finished, I'm bleeding from head to toe. Most people would view that as a wake-up call. Most people who have guns pointed at their heads stop doing what got them into that situation. But not me. I'm a drug addict. The second I got off that floor, I dusted myself off, and you know what I did? I asked him for drugs. That's the insanity of addiction. I may have just gotten my butt kicked, but that's a good trade-off if I go home with cocaine. And that's the tumultuous life I would live for years after that. I couldn't stop using cocaine. The vice grip that drug had around my neck was clutching me with an iron fist. Cocaine was my master. I went to grad school. I'm still doing these important things. I went to grad school at Arizona State University and was accepted into the prestigious Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication. I started freelancing for newspapers and magazines. I was interviewing big stars like the Grateful Dead's Bob Weir, big-name politicians. I once interviewed Arizona Governor Janet Napolitano, who would later become the head of Homeland Security, and I just kept asking these rambling, run-on questions because I just did a bunch of cocaine before I interviewed her. And my life was falling apart. I was running out of money. Cocaine's expensive. I wasn't paying bills. All of my disposable income was going up my nose. I was living in extremes that most people could only imagine. Around the same time that I'm interviewing governors, my car gets repossessed. And while I'm in grad school interviewing famous people, I'm now filing for bankruptcy because I spent hundreds of dollars a month on cocaine. Now I'm not going to classes anymore. I'm becoming more extreme in my drug use, smoking meth, snorting coke, shooting coke, having long sexual encounters with guys whose names I didn't even know, nor did I even bother asking. I was scared of real relationships. I was scared of love. I was only interested in relationships on my own terms. Anyone who got too close to me, I pushed them away. I was much more comfortable sleeping with strangers than I was establishing good, healthy relationships. And that was my life through all of grad school living in Arizona. Then in 2006, I moved back to Colorado to get away from all my problems. I even did try to get help. For the first time, I admitted to friends and family that my life had become unmanageable and that I needed help. So in the spring of 2006, I checked into a 28-day rehab center in Estes Park. It would be the first time I had gone an entire month without drinking or doing drugs since I was in junior high school. I was about 29 at the time. But I wasn't ready to quit. I was scared. I couldn't imagine never doing drugs ever again. So the day I checked out of rehab, I got high. It just goes to show you that you can have rehab centers on every corner of every block, and it wouldn't matter unless you're ready and willing to get help. That year, I started working for a newspaper in Canyon City, and I was doing good work. I was covering crime in courts and city government. I even won my first press award through the Colorado Press Association. But in the summer of 2006, I started to notice that something was going on with me. I wasn't feeling well. I was sick all the time. I was tired all the time. I kept getting bizarre rashes on my skin. I didn't know what was going on. I felt weak, like I had the flu all the time. Doctors would run tests, and no one could figure out what was going on. Until one day, a doctor who knew my history and my lifestyle asked me, "When's the last time you were tested for HIV?" And as soon as the words came out of his mouth, I knew that was the answer. And sure enough, the results came back. I'm HIV positive. Two of the major things that doctors look at in an HIV positive person's blood work are the CD4 white blood cells, which is a vital part of a person's immune system, and the viral load, which measures the presence of the HIV virus. When I was first diagnosed with HIV, my CD4 count was dangerously low, and the viral load was through the roof. I was what you would consider someone who had borderline AIDS. When I got that news, I fell into a deep despair. I drank daily, I did drugs daily. So now look at the evidence. What has my addiction done? Has it ruined my finances? Check. Has my addiction affected work? Check. Has my addiction affected my health? Check. I picked up the pieces from my diagnosis, and like I had done so many times before, I would just smile through the pain and tell jokes, make other people laugh, and display talent that continued to get noticed despite all of my problems. In 2007, I was hired by the Albuquerque Journal. I covered crime for the journal's Santa Fe bureau. It was here where my career really picked up steam. I was doing investigative reporting work. I broke stories. I was winning reporting awards. I was also interviewing and meeting big names like Don Rickles was the highlight of my life, and Jay Leno. I mean, there were some really cool things happening because I continued to show a talent that it was hard for people to say no to. And for about 6 years, I earned a reputation as a top-notch reporter covering crime in northern New Mexico. And I even met my first long-term boyfriend. We were together for about 5 years. But like so many times before, I sabotaged my own success. When I first moved to Santa Fe, I largely behaved well and stayed away from drugs. But then I started to reintroduce cocaine. I would do cocaine when I would visit Denver, but those trips became more frequent, and then pretty soon I'm bringing back large quantities of cocaine back from Denver to Santa Fe, and pretty soon I'm doing it every day again. My mood suffered, my work suffered, I was difficult to be around. I constantly picked fights with people I loved and was unnecessarily combative with others. One day, after getting very little sleep the night before from drinking and doing cocaine all night, I got into a shouting and cursing match with the Santa Fe police lieutenant. This happened in the middle of the newsroom, and I was fired. So it's 2012, I was fired from yet another job indirectly because of drugs. So that year, I cashed out all of my retirement savings and moved back to Denver, where I moved into an apartment close to my favorite bar and drank and did drugs every night. I now have no money for retirement because I just spent it all on cocaine. I got a new job covering politics at the Capitol for a group of suburban newspapers. Now I'm wearing a suit and tie every day covering state house politics. I covered one of the most memorable legislative sessions in Colorado history, 2013, when Democrats had total control of the Capitol. I covered gun legislation, elections reform, all kinds of important controversial measures. And once again, I was winning awards. I was getting recognized for my work. I was going on TV talking about politics. And that was part of my problem. It was impossible to convince me that I had a problem, because the evidence was that I kept winning awards and meeting deadlines, and people thought I was funny and charming, right? I lived on Capitol Hill, and I had access to lawmakers and doing all this important stuff every day. I mean, how could I possibly have a problem? Most people would love to do what I'm doing. I did make another half-hearted attempt to get sober around this time. I even met a sponsor. We met once a week. His name was Rob. We talked on the phone. But that didn't last long. I wasn't ready to get sober, so I just kept using cocaine. But my cocaine use had gotten bad, so bad that it had become physically difficult to do the drug anymore. I was starting to get nosebleeds. My nose hurt in the morning after long nights of partying. I was destroying my nasal cavities. But instead of quitting drugs altogether, which is what I should have done, I started doing them in a different way. So in late 2013 or so, I started smoking crack. And I was doing it every day. Crack cocaine is basically the same. It's the base form of cocaine hydrochloride powder that's smoked. And so you combine it with water and baking soda. And smoking crack delivers a faster high to your brain than snorting powdered cocaine. So the effects of the drug are intense and immediate. And I would go out of my way to get high. When I would be covering hearings at the Capitol, I would walk outside in my suit and tie and either go into my car or behind a dumpster in an alley to get high. The high doesn't last long with crack, so I was doing this quite a bit. And there were times I would emerge from a trip of smoking crack in a suit behind a dumpster and then go ask the governor some questions. This was my life. As the morning progressed, I would become more sketchy and paranoid, so I would just leave the Capitol. I would go home in the middle of the day, close the curtains in my apartment, and get high throughout the night. I used to be really social and outgoing. Now I've become isolated in my drug use. I didn't even show up for my own birthday party. A bunch of friends were throwing a party at a bar. They would send me pictures of balloons and people smiling. They kept texting me, asking me if I was coming. I ignored them. I shut off my phone and got high alone on my birthday. And when I wasn't smoking crack, I was smoking meth. One way or another, I was going to get high. I was once at the airport in San Diego. I was next in line to go through security screening. I was wearing the same pants I wore to a Fish concert the night before, and I realized that I had a bag of meth in my pockets. I made up an excuse to get out of line, thank God, and went to the bathroom and flushed the drugs down the toilet. What could have been, huh? 4 years ago this month, I was laid off from my job covering the Capitol. Around the same time, a guy I was in love with broke up with me because of my drug use. It was the coldest, darkest Christmas ever. I had no job, no money. My days consisted of walking the dog in the morning and sitting at a bar as soon as it opened at 10 o'clock. Getting a little drunk and then going home and getting high by myself the rest of the day. The only exercise I ever got was the few feet that it took me to walk from my apartment to my bar stool every day. I was lying to my parents. I was lying to my friends. I kept conning people out of money. Just $100 here so I could pay rent. I'll pay you back. I never paid people back. My life was constant damage control. There were times when I would lay in bed and pray to God to just let me sleep. It would be 3 a.m. and my heart would be racing from all the drugs I was doing. But I was so tired. And then I would just pray for my heart to stop beating so that all of my pain would just go away. Then on January 25th, 2015, something happened. I'd been up for 3 straight days, but I just smoked my last crack rock and I didn't have any more money to buy any more. I was sitting on the floor in my bedroom listening to music on my cell phone in one hand, holding an empty crack pipe in the other. My dog was laying next to me. I was listening to 2 songs on a loop, Radiohead's Fake Plastic Trees and Josh Ritter's Change of Time. And I listened to those songs over and over again on a loop, and I would listen to the Radiohead lyric, "If I could be who you wanted all the time." And I thought of how people thought of me as this incredibly talented person, but I could never get out of my own way. I just felt so helpless. Then I would listen to Josh Ritter's lyric, "New worlds for the weary, new lands for the living. I could make it if I tried." Maybe it was time to try. I was so tired of being tired. Tears were streaming down my face. I scrolled through my phone and came across my old sponsor's number. The sponsor I mentioned before, Rob. But it was 3 a.m. or whatever it was. Who knows if this guy was even awake or if he even still had his phone number. He still had my phone number. But I had nothing to lose. I dialed the number and he answered. And the first words out of his mouth were, "Hi, Vic, how's it going?" And I started crying, and I said, "Rob, please take me to a meeting." And I've been sober since. You know, everything was different when I finally admitted that my addiction had beaten me down and I was willing to change. I had to set aside my ego and allow for change to be possible. I didn't think that was possible when I was getting high every day. But as Buddha said, each day we are born again. I've done hard work in recovery, examining the things that drove my addiction. Through hard work, I realized that I was living a life dominated by fear and resentment. When I threw temper tantrums in school, I was scared. It was out of fear. When I broke up with boyfriends before relationships got serious, it was out of fear of being hurt. I realized in recovery that during all those years of getting high, I never loved myself. So I would get high so I didn't have to be myself. Now I could look back at pictures of myself when I was a little boy with compassion and love. And sometimes, and this sounds cheesy, in early recovery, I would look at old pictures of me when I was at a bar stool and I looked haggard. And I would say, you were someone who was scared and lonely, and I love you. I'm not a religious person, but in recovery, I embraced the possibility of a spiritual intervention. My recovery began with a 12-step program called Cocaine Anonymous. I'm now part of a Buddhist-based recovery network called Refuge Recovery. My idea of a higher power may not be the same as yours, but in my spiritual recovery, the bottom line is this: I believe in a power that's greater than myself. I also believe in the power of community, that I could go to concerts with friends in recovery and stay sober. I could go to Broncos games with other friends in recovery and stay sober. There's a guy in the front row right now. He is my sponsor. His name is Dan, and I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for him. So thank you, Dan. I also wouldn't be here without the love and support of my parents and family, my sisters and my younger brother. By the way, I talked about my dad's struggles with alcohol earlier. The man's been sober for 16 years. I'm open and honest about my recovery. If you follow me on Twitter or Facebook, you'll see that I talk about addiction quite a bit. And I get asked sometimes, why do you put yourself out there? Why do you draw attention to yourself on such a taboo subject? Well, I'll tell you why. It's things like this. A message from someone on Twitter. Someone sent me a message that says, I wanted to let you know, Vic, that you were a big inspiration for me to get sober. Thank you for your openness. I hope one day to inspire others like you have inspired me. That's what it's about. I'm open about my past struggles to show others there is a way out, that recovery is possible, to remove the stigma attached to addiction, because the truth is we are all broken. Every one of us in this room is broken in some way. And the more we shine a light on our problems, the less scary they are. I'm not a unique story. Mine is one of many stories. I'm just lucky because so far I have survived. But others have not. When you read statistics in the news about drug overdoses and death, you see numbers. I see names. Names like Richard, a jolly friend of mine and an old deadhead who always made me laugh, who died of liver disease. Eddie, who I loaned a prepaid phone card to at rehab, and he was so grateful. He took his own life by driving his car off the top of a parking garage. Damien, one of the first guys I ever loved and shared a bed with, who died of a pill overdose a few years ago. These may be your statistics, but they are my friends. People I know who are no longer with us. They're friends, they're your kids, who I will never see smile again. But for the rest of us, there is hope. If you're struggling with addiction, I'm here to tell you, you don't have to feel like this anymore. You don't have to lie to people anymore. You don't have to wake up feeling like hell anymore. You don't have to live with fear and resentment or anger anymore. God willing, on January 25th of 2019, I will have 4 years of sobriety. 12 years ago, I had borderline AIDS. Now the virus is undetectable in my bloodstream. I'm as healthy as I've ever been. I host the news for Denver's NPR station, Colorado Public Radio. Any listeners, by the way? All right. I will not ask you for money, I promise. Here, at least. It's the first sober job I've ever had in my career. I used to think that I couldn't be creative without drugs. But since I've been sober, I've won back-to-back Edward R. Murrow Awards. I love my job, and I'm grateful for the support from the many talented people I work with who I love and admire. Also, this January, I will join my alma mater, Metropolitan State University of Denver, as an associate journalism professor. I was once kicked out of every class and barely graduated high school. Now I'm about to be a college professor. You can clap, that's great. And there's some exciting things on the horizon that I can't even talk about yet, but stay tuned. Listen, addiction can make you feel so alone. But I'm telling you, there is a way out. You don't have to be alone. And if you are a parent or your loved one, or you have a friend who just can't seem to stop using and they're driving you crazy, never ever give up on them. Don't ever give up on people, because the terrible person that you see is not them. It's not them. They are so much better than the person they're showing you. There is a way out. We can get better. We can heal. We can learn to live in love. We can do it. And I'll close with the words of the Grateful Dead. Of course, we will get by. We will survive. Thank you.